Okay, I'm going to kick off. My name is Justin Hardman. I'm one of the directors of 21st Century Learning International. We're a Hong Kong-based organization, and we're putting this webinar on today in conjunction with Steelcase. And I've got Umbro sitting next to me. And thank you to all. We just had north of 500 people register from 43 countries around the world. We're sitting here today in the beautiful Steelcase offices in Hong Kong. And we have panelists that I'll introduce in a second from Hong Kong, China, Malaysia. Our topic today is what's next, navigating challenges to learning spaces. And we hope to have an energizing and informative discussion with all of our panelists. As we go through, many of you will no doubt have your own questions. So we encourage you to submit those via the Q&A function in Zoom, which you should find in the bottom bar. And we have someone on the call, Graham, one of my colleagues, who will be looking at those questions and suggesting which of them to answer at the end. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Umbras, who will give us some opening remarks from Steelcase.
Thank you, Justin, for the introduction and for this great opportunity again to partner with 21st Century Learning International for the 5th consecutive year. So thank you all for joining today from all around the world, with the majority from Asia Pacific. A special thanks to Sunil, Jessica, Ahmed, and John, our great panelists who accepted our invitation to explore the now near and far challenges to learning spaces. My name is Ambroise, and I'm taking care of the education segment at Steelcase in Asia Pacific. I have been 13 years between Shanghai and Hong Kong, and now 18 years within the company. Our reputation comes from 100 years of experience in creating innovative learning environments with learning institutions around the world. So why are we so passionate about this panel today? Recently, the Steelcase education team has been helping schools and universities to anticipate the change, the transformation, and the evolution of education by designing and furnishing their learning spaces. At Steelcase, we have been observing the new world by looking at those three areas: the now, the near, and the far. So I guess it's the perfect time today to reflect together about navigating what is next. I'm handing over to Justin.
Okay, so without further ado, I'm just going to introduce our panelists today. So first off, we have Dr. Ahmed Hussain from Wellington College, China. He's joining us today from Shanghai. Sunil Tolar from a Chinese International School, Director of Operations, also here in Hong Kong. Dr. Jessica Hale, joining us technically from the US. She's up late at 1 a.m., but from Oasis International School in Kuala Lumpur. And then finally, John Stewart, who's Director of Facilities for English Schools Foundation in Hong Kong. So we'll just jump right into the questions. And as Umbro said, we're structuring this around kind of three sections. So at the moment, we find ourselves in a time of great uncertainty as the world faces this global pandemic, amongst other things, that we haven't experienced in the recent past. As we all know, schools by their nature are organizations that typically are highly planned and to an extent thrive on predictability and routines. COVID's forced schools to think quickly, react and adjust in real time to emerging situations. So I'd like each of you to just respond, maybe starting with the order of the names I read out with Ahmed, is what have you learned during this early period of reopening in terms of how you set up your schools for learning, but balancing that safety in mind?
I think we've learned a lot in recent months and definitely recent weeks as schools have reopened. I think we've learned to have much more confidence in our infrastructure, the things we do that help keep pupils safe. We've learned a great deal about regulations, how we implement them. We are much more confident in our pupils' level of independence, actually. That's been a key finding of a number of studies we've led, and having to harness that post e-learning, school closure.
Perhaps if we want to just go along to the next person, Sunil, if you want to reflect on what you've been learning in this period of reopening.
Well, just to carry on to what Agwa was saying, yeah, we surely realized that the buy-in and the trust from the community, which plays a huge role in whatever actions we take or did not take. CIS in general, we went over and above beyond the normal government guidelines when it came to safety or acceptance with pre-opening. That allowed us to have that trust or the with all our stakeholders. And as we have opened, we have put in very strict rules in place which are not compromisable in any case or for anybody. And we had to make hard decisions where should we provide lunch or should we not provide lunch, because that's a big piece of about having everybody in a large space and unable to social distance them. Because of Hong Kong, we don't have the space to do that. And I think we were one of the few schools who did, again, the difficult decision of going down a hybrid model. But once again, whatever works for your community is a big piece over here, because they have to buy into it. And that builds the trust. And moving forward, we already are putting plans in place that this is not going away. We may have another wave or two in the new academic year. So people are, and it's pure change management, where people have to just be addressed and made feel confident, like whatever we're doing to go along with us and take in the necessary positive or negative feedback from especially the families. Pass on to.
That's great. Jessica, I know you haven't resumed school yet this school year, but maybe talk us through what your thinking is and how you're planning that out.
Sure. So we're in a unique position in that we were able to end the year with remote learning. And I think just to add to that, if there are schools that are looking to end and not start back until the new term, just finding ways to end the year well and celebrate what was accomplished, I think was really important. We did a parade where teachers stood a meter apart and waved to the kids as they did a drive through the school parking lot. So that was really special. Our next steps are following the government's SOPs and just having 3 skeleton plans for reopening. I think one thing we learned was we didn't have a really solid continuity of learning policy, which can or cannot, it can include health and it depends on the school. That can include some of the health procedures as well, but tightening up that continuity of learning policy. And then just, I think Sunil had a great point, is there's a lot of value in going a little bit above and beyond even what the government is requiring, because it does build confidence in the community. So being responsive, I think, is important, and agile and able to change quickly with government requirements.
Those are all great points. And John.
Thank you very much. I would echo colleagues 100%. Sunil and I's context is, of course, very similar. We're both in Hong Kong. We went with an approach as we're 22 schools. Our kindergartens haven't been able to resume classes, so we've got 17 schools that have resumed. And it was we took a decision that we were going to go 100% learning, which was continuity of distance and online, and then 50% in school for the whole day. So some of the things that Sunil's mentioned, lunch and so on, we took a decision that actually going to the effort of bringing the kids in, let's keep them in for the whole day. So it's every other day. And so that's been successful thus far. Some of the points that Jessica's made, how to celebrate end of year, how to manage transitions between primary and secondary, how do you make that stuff happen that really cements the experience for kids? It's tough, and you've got to find ways, and we are finding ways. Trust and confidence of the communities. An approach we took was we established overarching principles across all the schools. We did that together. We co-created those, but then we layered in local context, which is absolutely critical, and that's where the trust element comes in. The school communities, families, the students, the bus service providers, the staff, everybody else, they understand the local context. Challenges, things that we're learning. understanding the impact on staff day to day. There's a lot going on with blended model where you've got online supported and you've got kids coming in and you've got face masks to manage and temperature checks to take and all those fun things. Sort of making sure that we understand that and we learn from that and we carry that forward and evolve the thinking and the practice. And I guess the last thing for me is never forget the simple stuff. Have you got enough face masks? Have you got the disinfectant gel? Have you got your temp station set up? Have you got batteries in your temp gun? It's the little things that make a big difference for people feeling that when they send their kids in, there's that confidence that they're going to be well looked after and they're going to be kept safe. So yeah, there's lots to learn for sure. Sunil, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, just to add to what John and Jessica mentioned, closure is important over here for all parties over here. Your students, of course, your faculty, and your supporting teams. And just following on guidelines where the kindergartens are not allowed to come in, we had to come up with a closure strategy where the teachers met the small groups of kindergarten kids in a park far away where they still could have that closure for these little ones. For your supporting teams, you have your end of year celebrations and things like that for a job well done, which the schools are not able to do right now. That also is trying to be delivered in smaller groups of some sort. Because this blended model or it's a big major mental shift to a system which we have been so used to for the last, 100 odd years. And we are kind of inventing the wheel on the emotional side and not only on the physical side when we talk about hand gels, etc. The emotional piece is very, very important. And we made sure we had all our support group and counselors available at all time to all stakeholders. Just to add to what John and Jessica said.
Can I just jump in? I mean, I hope this is okay, but again, Sunil, absolutely critical that staff feel and are well supported. I mean, we've been learning, there is such a broad spectrum of response and reaction, not just to a new way of teaching and interacting with students in school, but in Hong Kong, we had protests, we had social unrest, then we got hit with COVID, and the emotional impact of that on staff well-being is something that we've been really, really keen to keep an eye on. And again, to your point, really important, if you can, is to get resources ready to deploy on that. We had educational psychologists and psychologists come in, give talks, give Zoom sessions, I should say, when we got into COVID. And just talking about it makes a difference because it opens up that dialogue for people to say, oh, okay, I am feeling this way, and it's okay to share that. And that's where the good conversations happen for support.
And the organization cares.
Yes.
Justin, your microphone is off.
Ahmed, are you back?
Sorry about that. Yeah, Ahmed, are you back?
I don't think so.
Hopefully we managed to get Ahmed back on the call. Whilst we're waiting on that, I want to just give Umbras a chance to talk about what he's been learning from the market. Like 21st Century Learning, a lot of the organizations that are working with schools, this opportunity of COVID has presented an opportunity for us to kind of take a step back and reflect and learn more from what everyone's doing. So what have you observed and learned from schools?
Yes, first of all, there are like 4 categories of schools. I mean, those as still closed, like in the US, in Thailand, or in Korea. Those are partially reopening. Australia and Hong Kong. You were mentioning Hong Kong, John, that primary schools have not yet opened. Those who are fully reopening, like China or Malaysia, and those who have always been open since day one, like Vietnam or New Zealand. For those partially or fully reopening, they all had to set up a PRT. I don't know if you are familiar with this pandemic response team, PRT, to address the health and safety that Sunil was talking about of students returning to schools by setting up new regulation on protocols, by training educators and students to respect those rules. So at Steelcase, we call this first wave the retrofit stage of learning spaces. What can we do now to respond to immediate needs? So the initial action was to deal with physical distancing by using key principles for this retrofit stage. So by lowering the density of learning spaces on their population. Number two is by changing the geometry of the furniture arrangements. And last but not least, by designing screens, panels, or other barriers. So that's on the learning space perspective.
That's great.
I'll just jump in there. I mean, that was a key factor, certainly for us. And just reflecting on our sort of class resumption planning, we had to rapidly devise responses to government requirements. So look, sorry, preface this with the way that kids learn in all of our schools is not in rows facing one direction. It's not chalk and talk, right? But when the government announced its plans to allow classes to resume, there was an initial position which was it's face to back in rows facing one direction. So to Ambroise's point, we had to rapidly evolve. Hey, what can our learning spaces look like? Not that we're doing it in rows. The Education Bureau relaxed their thinking a little bit and gave us some wiggle room. But how do you make that work? We've got 30 kids in our classes in primary, something similar in secondary. And the solution we had was the 50% model. So that basically gives us that desaturated sort of space use, if you like, on a day-to-day basis. And then we just had to get literally teachers and EAs and support staff and everybody, principals in classrooms, rearranging tables and chairs and desks, and hey, how might this look and feel so that it enhances the learning experience for kids. One of our approaches, we developed 3 simple tests before we reopened and got classes back in. It's 1, could we comply with the requirements? 2, does it enhance their learning? Because if it doesn't, why would we do it? And then can we all go together and do something similar? Now, the last one makes sense. But the piece about enhancing the learning was actually one of the most, not difficult, but the most deep conversation is, okay, we can bring them back in, but if it's in rows face to back, this is not an enhanced learning experience. So you literally had to go in and just sort of reconfigure all those learning spaces from scratch, which was really, really useful because it makes people rethink, okay, what do I actually need to be successful? And decluttering was a wonderful thing to watch, if I may.
And just to add to what John said, he's absolutely in the mark about going and rearranging all the spaces and whether they bring any value, and giving the limitation of Hong Kong physical footprint traces in all our campuses. You know, we went through the 50% models of alternate days or half days or whatever worked, but it put also so much pressure on the faculty. They had just, you know, from February onwards, it took them about a month or a month and a half to get used to just doing online delivery. And now 2 months after that, they have to come back in, and now they have to do online and face-to-face the same lesson, and try and support the kids who are not able to come in for whatever reason, or stuck in different countries, or parents are not comfortable for selling them in. So there's all that emotional and mental, I would say, stress and how to support them with their needs. So it's just a different landscape.
Yeah, that's all great. I want to bring you into the conversation, Jessica. I know that, you know, through the other networks we're in, we talk a lot, you know, prior to COVID about exciting new models for learning, project-based learning, that all of these things involve social interactions. And so with COVID, has the world of learning changed? Can we still get on board with some of these new exciting kind of learning modalities with the potential restrictions that creating a healthy and safe environment brings?
So when I'm asked this question, I respond with, I'm more excited about what's happened in the past 6 months, because educators have been asking for a revolution in education, and it's happening. We couldn't have changed the way we teach. We wouldn't have radically changed the way we teach if anything else had happened. So ultimately, I'm super excited. I think it has forced teachers to think more in terms of blended learning models. And I think it's important to delineate between, when we talk about blended approaches and blended learning. So we talk about blended learning, we're talking about giving students choice over the pace of their learning and what they're learning. And that's really been happening in this shift to remote learning. So I do think ultimately, yes, project-based, student choice, personalization, and blended learning models are all instructional strategies that were coming into play and really have been forced to come into play. Another piece of the puzzle I think that I've been excited about in the digital learning spaces is the change in perspective of assessment. There's not a lot of good digital platforms out there for delivering formal assessments. There are some. I'm kind of excited about that because it forces us to do more project-based and again, personalized learning experience and move away from this traditional assessment models. So I think ultimately that gets us into more comfortable spaces in our digital learning environments. I have ideas about what the physical spaces look like. Ultimately, I think, and I'm curious about John and Sunil's experience with this, if we as educators value collaboration among our students, how do we still facilitate that in these flexible learning spaces with social distancing? So that's something I'm chewing on right now, and I'm curious the thoughts on the panel for that. But as far as the digital spaces, I'm excited about it. And ultimately, in any revolution, my background is a history teacher, so you can get me started on that. In any revolution, there's discomfort, but I think ultimately we'll come out on the other side, really changing what we're doing, our instructional strategies for the better as educators.
Thanks a lot, Jessica. John, I see your hand, but I hear getting word that Ahmed is back on the call, so I just want to give him an opportunity to maybe respond to what Jessica just offered there, if he's able. Are you there, Ahmed?
Yes, I am, and thank you, Justin. Just following on from what Jessica said, I think there is an opportunity here to reconceptualize what's important in learning. I know something that we've done is identify how our pupils have become so much more independent in learning. You know, that gives us a real opportunity to build on that when they're back in school now. The other thing we noticed is the teachers needed time to, develop their understanding, become confident, work with the pupils in terms of developing their understanding of e-learning and how they approach that. But what our studies showed was that those teachers that apply what works well in a classroom in an e-learning context were more successful. And I think there is a bit of learning from this, and something I've been using across our group is, let's not reify the importance of technology here. Technology is a tool. It's no different to a textbook. It supports learning. Learning, whether it's e-learning or in the classroom, follows what we understand about learning. Those teachers who do it well and understand the concepts that underpin that are more successful. But I do like this idea of an opportunity to reconceptualize what's important. And perhaps more people are recognizing pupil independence, pupil well-being, really looking at personalizing learning to a much greater degree. So I think that's some of the things we found from this.
That's great. Thanks a lot. And John, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, look, really, back in the technology piece, it was everything in February and March, because we were rapidly finding our feet, taking ourselves out of our normal into what was emerging as a new normal around tech and tech use. And that was just so rapid, and it became about the tech. But what was really interesting is once we got over the initial stability, how do we figure this stuff out day to day, it quickly became about, right, this is a tool, but how do we now get back to what's working well for learners and learning? What's the glue? What's working well? And it became a tool. So that was really, really interesting. The bit about what next and sort of the very, very short term, one of our big bits of work at the moment is resisting an organizational return to the old way of being, given it's been such a difficult period emotionally and physically and social distancing and everything else. And that for us is one of our sort of mainstays, is to have the conversations about how do we anchor this into it being our new normal, celebrate, embrace, move forward, and develop. That's just an ongoing conversation, and it has to be ongoing, because I agree with Jessica, there is such an opportunity here to just fundamentally change what we do and how we do it with and for the students that we have. So it's fantastic to put a positive spin on the COVID-19 crisis.
That's great. I've seen a lot of questions come in. We're not at the Q&A part just yet, around really some concrete and practical things that you're doing in your schools in terms of getting back. And maybe it will be helpful for the schools that have come back, and we can start again with you, John. What are some very concrete things you can share that you're doing to ensure the kind of safety and also ensure the learning?
First port of call is, what are your local regulations? Go through them, fine tooth comb, come up with a matrix that says you've got to do this, this, this. Look at things like health declarations from families around every student. We devised that as a pro forma, and then we put it online. We've got an online system. It became a Google form that was populated, and then each parent finished it, sent it in. So we knew that every student who came into campus or came up to campus was able to be there. Things like quarantine, travel, temp checks in the morning, stuff like that. Temperature checks at home became a requirement here. So it's about, getting a sheet, putting it in the diary, making sure that can be done and captured, making sure you're broadcasting that to your community. Buses, disinfecting your buses after every shift, going in with the Sanimist machines. Interestingly, in Hong Kong, we've got social distancing in the classroom of 1 meter at least, but they can sit close together on the buses, which was an interesting position. However, it is what it is. Once the kids are rocking up to school, it's having your temperature check and stations right. If you've got a school with 2,000 students and you've only got 2 tables with thermometers that are infrared, that's going to take you a long time to get them through. Some of our schools went with infrared cameras, which is a lot quicker, like you've seen in the airports. We don't have to do temperature check recording. We just identify if anybody's elevated, put them to the side, isolate them, deal with them later. Normally they get sent home, blah, blah, blah. Having a nurse on hand, making sure your nurse is around and knows what to do, making sure there's sanitizing gel stations all over the place, making sure you've got masks. For us, we said that students bring their own masks, and in Hong Kong, the government issued masks to every student. So we took a position of just having some spares just in case. In school, we developed one-way systems so we can maintain social distancing around campus, upstairs and downstairs. And then I guess one of the biggest things for us was we did a phased approach to return. So we only brought in a very small number of students on day 1, test all of those systems, and make sure that it works. Then we bring in 2 days later, because we run in a 2-day cycle. 2 days later, we bring in a couple more year groups. So by the end of week 1, we had our first day of albeit 50% of students, but that was our maximum number coming in. So by that time, we'd learned some stuff. So I would say for anyone who's thinking about opening schools again, give yourself some runway to test out your systems. Make sure you've got plenty of supplies. Make sure you've got everybody's briefed. Have your staff briefings and make sure that they know what your protocols are, and comms to parents. Making sure that they know what to expect. Some of our schools, in fact, not all of our schools, did return to school videos for students. So the principal, vice principals, members of staff actually enacted coming into school and what it would look and feel like. And that was huge. It just burst the bubble of stress for students who hadn't been in schools. Look, some of our students haven't been out of their apartments for months. And none of the students really had been in school for the best part of 4.5 months. So for some of them, it would have been quite a struggle, but we got there and it was successful. Sunil, do you have any, just sort of adding to that?
Yeah, just to add, in fact, almost like a carbon copy approach, as what John mentioned. But during the closure time, we took the opportunity of putting like close to 300 hand gel dispensers outside almost every door. And you absolutely invested and got, I don't know, dozen worth of infrared scanners or thermal scanners, briefing the team, yes. And comms, and I think that's what I want to bring up. The comms to the parents, the communication to the parents almost every week of what's happening. Along with whether we're opening or not was not got to do with the government over here in Hong Kong. And the government had at one stage, so we will give the schools at least 3 weeks notice so you can prepare accordingly. And what we did is with the comms, and I will give kudos to the leadership team. They said, okay, here's the communication as of today. There will be an update on 5 days from now by this time. And they stuck to their gun on that. So there was nothing left to guesswork. And that really helped to ease the parents. And of course, the students. Now, mind you, we also run a Hangzhou campus. And we were very fortunate that just before the COVID situation hit in Hong Kong, our Hangzhou students were on Chinese New Year break in Hong Kong. So we were also dealing with that. So of course, they never went back. So these kids are finishing off their year. Tomorrow is our last day of school. And so there was a whole emotional side over there too also to deal with. And lastly, as you said, the celebration piece of coming back to campus, it was also phased approach. There's a big, it was like a fair, like, all the faculty waiting for the kids with bubble machines and music and, welcome back. And that created a huge, huge smile, a positive impact on the students. And we stuck our guns, no parents on campus. And even for the little ones, year one, of course, grade 0. Only recently, we were able to even complete our graduation, which has been done with small batches. We allowed parents to come on, but we couldn't do the entire cohort. We did it like in 3 or 4 sessions normally, and a much mini version than what it would normally take. The closure piece is important as you bring it back when you're preparing the kids to come back on campus. So how do you close it also?
That's great. Ahmed, what about your schools in China? Do you have any practical, concrete ideas that you can share with the audience around return?
In China, obviously the process was very similar to what's been described for Hong Kong. Regulations were robust, clearly communicated. We were able to follow those. The key things that have been mentioned were key to us. One was very clear communication was imperative. We've talked about parents, we talked about pupils, but also with staff as well, because like your schools, Chinese New Year was when the closure was implemented. We had staff around the world. They needed very clear communications on how and when and to come back to China to manage that. Parents needed that communication. We started very much with facilities, making sure facilities were ready. There was a series of inspections to ensure we met those. I would recommend every school looks at that first to make sure the facilities are ready to welcome people back into schools. That included some of the things that have been described around hand gels through to managing distancing through perspex screens in the dining hall, and that's what we did. We made sure the medical operations, the services were ready, from buses through to nurses. And then it was a lot of work on building confidence locally, making sure those teachers who had been working what was a grueling treadmill of e-learning, to then come back into school with huge expectations in terms of their monitoring, their duties around ensuring social distancing, how children ate lunch occurred, but building confidence within the community that we were fine, things were going to be fine. The advantage we had is that there was very measured return, starting with our oldest pupils and working our way down. Our schools in Hangzhou have been back over a month now. Likewise, our schools in Tianjin and Shanghai have recently just come back in full now. In the classrooms, it's been interesting. There was reservation and people were quite conservative initially. Tables were laid out as required, which was the big gaps between them. But learning didn't stop. And once again, those teachers that stuck with, what we understand about learning, made it personalized, made it collaborative, made it engaging. We found that there was greater use of technology for collaboration as opposed to physically being together and getting up and moving around, but we still allowed, where possible, learning to occur as we would want it. There was movement around school, the arts, performance still happened. PE was a challenge in terms of we had to make quite big changes to the curriculum in terms of how PE happens, but that's been done, and the curriculum's been moved around a little to ensure that there's less team games, there's much more personal focus on personal physical development. But I think one of the things that the teams did very well here was focus on communication and building a sense of confidence.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Ahmed. I want to pivot to Ambrose. You're connected with many schools around the region, around the world. Have you observed or seen any innovations in hardware to?
So if we talk about the near, I mean, what we call at Steelcase, we call this wave the reconfigure stage, meaning like we are still in the middle of listening to our customers now. There is only a few weeks of school left to go by end of June. So we need to think about the new school year in September, or even next February in Australia when they're gonna start the first semester. At Steelcase, again, we call it this reconfiguring stage. We believe educational institutions may be ready to bring back most of their teachers and students and activities as well by September. So this will involve new ways to lay out space and change setting to offer longer term solutions. So for better safety. So solutions should be highly adaptable. So space can change quickly in response to unplanned future disruptions. So example, design for disinfecting, materiality, key things, antibacterial finishes or tops, easy to clean surfaces, flexible furniture and power, easy for the user to move the furniture, of course, to allow distance when needed. Mobile power to allow choice and control over physical distancing again. We are talking about blended learning. Blended learning needs, of course, more digital screens around the classroom. Again, the materials you're gonna buy on those technology need as well to respond to those regulations. And last but not least, standing connection. With flexible standalone screens, you can move around the space. So with tools as well, so people can naturally distance themselves. So how about prototyping the solution on site? That's what actually we are doing with Hong Kong International School. The teachers need to gather during summertime to prepare the new school year. But again, they need to respect the rules and regulations. So we are currently prototyping a space where teachers can connect, collaborate, prepare the new school year, and they're gonna give us feedback because again, we don't know everything. We don't pretend that we have the solutions even from the near, but now thanks to the near, we are working to the far. So
that's great, and that's a great kind of pivot to the last section of the webinar before we get into the questions, of which we have quite a few. And in this section, I want to have our panelists really try and predict the future. Now, of course, after everything that's happened so far in 2020, it's harder than usual to make long-term predictions, perhaps. But with that being said, we do need to plan ahead. And in learning spaces, we're usually looking at quite a few years, right, in terms of what we're thinking about. So I want to think about the future and first go to Jessica and then Ahmed and get your take on whether or not you think these current changed arrangements are going to cause a permanent shift in the way we learn and what the impact of that will be on learning space design. Maybe Jessica first.
Sure. So I hope so, and I hope not. Again, I think the panelists have done a great job of talking about we fundamentally need to look at what was worked and what really enhanced the student learning through this process and keep those things. And then some of them do away with. So what I do hope is again, a change in instructional strategies. I really love the idea of the mobile screens, and that's been a huge, I think some of our learning spaces are already set up like that. It's going to be make a smooth transition into going back to school. I think one of the things that I hope goes away is so much of the social distancing. I see the need for it now, but also see the need for our kids, especially our early years, to be close and play tag and those kinds of things. So I do think we've learned a lot. Ultimately, I think this has been a great process for us as educators to really take a deep look into what we value, and to change our practice. But at the end of the day, I do hope that we change for what fundamentally we believe enhances our student learning. So a little bit of both.
Ahmed, in terms of your thoughts on whether this will be a permanent shift in learning?
Yeah, I take the point from Jessica, whereby I think some things won't change. Learning theory is learning theory. You know, it's founded on a solid research base. We know it works. We've seen innovations around how we use the learning environment, where teachers have been more creative in their use of the classroom space, the chairs, where we put bookshelves, the amount of space young learners have to read and find their own social, exclusion within the classroom. So I think we will perhaps have people more confident and aware of using their learning environment better. We've seen much greater literacy in using technology. My view in terms of moving forward is that currently technology operates on the periphery of learning. It's a support, it's a contributor to the learning experience. Perhaps what will happen from this is we will begin to look at what's important around technology. And I think in the future, where we'll begin to look with technology is drawing on the power of technology to process and make sense of evidence, information, data, so that it can become much more central to learning. We are part of a research project looking at AI and how it can be used to make judgments around pupil engagement, pupil involvement, or well-being in a classroom. Real-time data to teachers around a child's well-being, their relative level of engagement, is going to centralize technology. Perhaps where we might get to is a repositioning of what's important in learning, with a focus on child development, independence, well-being, away from traditional focus on measured outcomes in the sense of exams. Hopefully this might get a bit of traction, and that's where we might move. Ultimately though, learning is social. It happens in schools, and it happens between groups of children who interact and collaborate. Schools will still be there, learning will still be social. Schools will still have a role in the pastoral care of children, their personal, social, emotional development, as well as learning. So I think whilst there will be some change, I hope it's more in conceptualizing what's important. Some of what happens will be marginal changes, I believe.
That's great, and that's an optimistic note to strike for the future. John and Sunil, you're obviously both responsible for the building projects in your organizations and and operations. And I'm curious about how you're building in capacity, both of your organizations, to respond to new challenges in the future. How has this changed your planning in the kind of medium to long term? Maybe starting with Sunil first.
Well, I think on the capacity wise, flexibility is the biggest key over here. And just to add on to what Ambrose said about the furniture side is a good example to put it, because we gotta be very, very malleable over here as to how our classrooms are laid out. And this is not only because of the COVID situation. I think it's the way the curriculum has evolved or evolving. And using Dr. Ahmed's technology piece over here for a minute, it's like the way students learn today, yes, it's social, but they learn social with the new tools, which is using technology. And a lot of them are self-learners in many, many ways, because the access to information, what's available to these digital natives, millenniums, is very different compared to what it was about a decade or two ago. So that's where the flexibility piece and not locking in or buying into I would say a technology or infrastructure for more than 5 years, because that's very, very return of investment has to be thought over here. When you say return of investment, not only on the physical asset, as to the return on the learning side of it, and what the child gets out of it. So I think building so that you're ready to be flexible and delivering the quality of service which is needed for the self-learning and the teaching for the kids. I think that's very critical. And we don't need to get into, okay, one internet line versus another access point. There's no right, and let's use the example, like when we had to go down with online learning, there was a large debate about which was the right tool, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, Zoom, etc., etc. There is no right tool. The right tool is what works for your community.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's it. So once you get away those debates and have the flexible, open mindedness, you will see, as Dr. said, it's just a tool. It's a delivery mechanism. So that's my thoughts.
Thanks a lot, Sunil and John.
Follow that. Thanks, Sunil. Look, it's exactly that, and I've got a couple of thoughts I'll share in a second. But see that point about stripping away and finding out what's really important and what really matters, and it doesn't matter if it's Microsoft, Mac, Teams, Google, blah blah blah. It's is it effective and does it make a difference? And that's the bit. That's the power that we can harness from this experience is the ability to strip away what doesn't really matter or what doesn't work so well. And there's now permission to say, you know what, that doesn't really work very well. Let's do it this way, or let's try this way. And that for me is one of the exciting things moving forward. We're talking about, or we're throwing around, and again, the thinking here is so evolving. It's so right now. One of the things we're looking at is trying to have, because we're really interested in what I call low stakes R&D. It is being able to play in the sandbox, the right people playing in the sandbox at the right time, coming up with ideas that may work, may not work, but it's so low stakes that it almost doesn't matter. You can kind of play around and see how it goes, and we'll find the gold there. So we're interested in looking at trying to get some very small development studio type, workshop type, not maker spaces at all. These are learning spaces, but ones that can be retrofitted, changed, adjusted, hyper agile, whatever it might be, test out new materials, whatever we want to do, whatever teachers might want to try, whatever students might want to tell us they want. That's where we think the gold sits. Furniture, super important. To Ambwa's point, we need to be really, really looking at how that works, what it looks and feels like, etc. And then the tech piece. Something that Ahmed said really resonates with me, and that is the social aspect. Now, tech is great, and a good friend of mine, Chris Burke from CTI Asia, has come up with using technology but staying human. And we have to walk that line and again find the gold that's there. But it's really evolving. So I'm kind of talking, in fairly ambiguous terms. We've got lots of good ideas. None of it's concrete, but I think that's part of the way forward. Is don't hold ourselves down by making it concrete right now. Don't make it, hey, this is our idea, we're going to do it for 10 years. Whoa, hang on. 10 years is a lifetime now. 6 months is a kind of window for planning around space use and tinkering and everything else, if not 3. That's the exciting bit. We have an opportunity to get down to the real gold of what makes a difference in classrooms for teachers to enhance the learning for students. It's going to be great.
So no, quickly, yeah.
Yeah. Just to add, as John said, yeah, you have your spaces and they have the basic core necessities: power, electricity, lighting, climate control, and some kind of network, internet or whatever. From there on, you can make that space moldable to anything you want year by year. I call it the IKEA demo rooms. You walk into the IKEA demo rooms, they change them every month. And that's where this needs to go. And he's absolutely right. We are in this hot space right now, and this is the time to probably build further from that.
That's great to know. Ambrose, what have you seen? I mean, what is Steelcase? Steelcase has a lot of research, in an ongoing way. You're connected with customers. Where do you see the learning environments in schools in the near future?
First, I would like to just repeat like some of key words I just heard from Hardman, like repositioning. I heard about revolution from Jessica at the beginning of the panel. Agile, but we still need to make the learning space social, right? From Samuel, and we need to stay human. That's quite key words, right? We talk about a lot of change, but we still need to be human. So at Steelcase, we call these waves to jump on this revolution, the reinvent wave. So again, the FAR. Learning environments in the future will require reinvention as emerging technologies offer new solutions. So going forward, school will need to be more flexible, yes, and able to adapt very quickly. COVID-19 was the catalyst for great change and transformation, but these innovations may well serve to carry education through other challenges that will have shut down learning in the past, such as earthquake in New Zealand or Japan or China, bushfire in Australia, typhoon or protests in Hong Kong, monsoons in Philippines or India. Wow. So now I would say we're gonna be much more prepared to face those challenges. In addition, reinvented learning spaces must be designed with a deeper commitment to the well-being of the students and faculty. So we talk about physical well-being, but we talk as well about cognitive well-being, and the most important is the emotional well-being. So you were talking about stress, how to release stress, and always to have the same focus of safety and learning at the same time. That's a challenge that we need, I guess, to fix or to work on. So our Steelcase research on well-being demonstrates the different components and the impact on learning. So there is a very deep research on well-being. I invite you to check on our website, but it's a great deep dive on emotional, physical, and cognitive well-being.
That's great, thank you, Amber. We can send out those links after the session. We have a few minutes left, so I want to get into some questions from the attendees, and there's a lot of them, so we're going to get to all of them, and I'll try and bounce around from some sort of big picture ones to some quite specific questions that are interesting as well. One here from Australia, it's sort of a long one, so I'll paraphrase, but essentially what she's asking is, do you think that because schools in Asia, compared with perhaps some schools around the world, have had a more protracted period of closure, do you think that protracted period of closure allowed for potentially more time for experimentation and learning to kind of get past some resistance phases in terms of change management with teachers and staff and students? Is that something that if in other words, if schools have been going back in, say, mid-March, would things have looked differently in terms of your view to the future? John?
I think the easy answer to that, certainly from my perspective, is yes, it has helped, because we didn't have a choice. And if we had been told middle of March, 6 weeks later, hey, classes are resuming again, even if it was the model we're working right now, I don't know that we would have had enough time to kind of bed in, not just the use, but the the mindset change that has been one of the benefits of what we've been through, a willingness to keep going. I mean, that was one of the amazing takeaways that I've had as a professional in the education business now for 15 years is, holy smokes, we've proven to ourselves that we can make rapid fundamental change in what we do and how we do it overnight, like that. We wouldn't have done it, I don't think, if it had only been for 4 or 6 weeks, because we would have been looking at the end and saying, okay, we've only got to do a little bit longer, folks, and then we're going to be there and everything's going to be back to normal, because there's a safety around that. We got pushed out of our comfort zone, and it was what has, I think, led to this opportunity around some fundamental conversations. That's my take on it.
Great, thanks.
Sorry, Justin, I don't have a hand. I'm just going to jump in there. You can't see my hand. I agree 100% with John, actually. We found that initially it was about just being operational and functional, making sure infrastructure was right, making sure people had access and understood the platforms that we were using. The innovation happened some weeks later, when teachers become more confident, parents understood what was important. You know, those pupils became more comfortable with learning at home, that we began to see real developments. So I think it probably is, we probably were able to benefit because of that sustained period. The first couple of weeks were not ideal while the teachers were learning. You know, we were, we were sharing work with pupils as we began to get face-to-face learning, real-time learning, you know, collaborative project-based approaches remotely up and working. You know, we were able to benefit from that. Also, I think the pupils were able to benefit, because whilst I wouldn't purport that learning happened at the rate it would have done in school, pupils developed in many other ways, you know, and I think those shouldn't be dismissed as being important.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. There's a question here around, there's actually a few questions around specifically how schools are handling social distancing with the younger learners. So for the early primary and kindergarten kids. So I don't know if any panelists have any magic bullets for that one, to have little kids stop touching each other and everything we know that little kids want to do.
It's very hard to tell little kids not to do something, okay? And they are going to carry on, because you can't keep an eye on them all the time. But one of the things, the policies we have put in place is, as I mentioned earlier, we have these hand gels outside every school, every classroom door. The mindset being that, okay, you're cleaning your hands before you enter the door every time you enter the classroom. That, along with 50% capacity, as John mentioned earlier, and with shorter school days, has helped to reduce that. But we have to also be mindful that we can reduce all that until within our campus perimeters. Once they leave our campus, there's not much that we can do. So might as well help them with the mindset of, okay, generally constantly clean your hands, wash your hands. That's more effective in many ways than telling them don't touch each other.
Yeah, building in those kind of procedures and welcome. John, I know you have something to say, but we really need to wrap up here soon. So I just want to go to one more question and then the final wrap up. The question around discipline. So how does discipline change in schools, both, I guess, in terms of classroom discipline when you're back in social distancing, but also online discipline as well? And I don't know, Jessica, if you have any thoughts around that.
Sure, that's been an adventure for sure. I've actually found the students that struggled on campus would tend to be the students that would struggle online. So that shouldn't be surprising, and isn't surprising. But I think around it led to more meaningful and deep conversations. So if we're really looking at discipline as a source of change behavior and reflecting on practice and things like that, it definitely this format, the online, the remote learning format, led to those deeper conversations around that. I can foresee when we go back to school, again, it would be implementing the social distancing in a detention hall or something like that. But just looking at it as an opportunity to maybe rethink and change the way and go back to the purpose and the reason why we're implementing the disciplinary measures, just like we're thinking about how we're rethinking why we're doing education.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you so much for that, Jessica. So we are at time now. We could keep talking for forever about this. It's been a great conversation. So I'm very thankful for all the panelists for giving up some of their time. And it's a busy time of the school year and a very unusual year. So we appreciate that. And thanks to everyone that's joined us. Just one quick kind of exit question for each of you, maybe starting with Ahmed, the order of the panelists, with what are you hopeful in all of this? Just 30 seconds on that.
What I know is we are much more confident in responding flexibly, responding to the need to change. I know we've been able to look at how we use those learning spaces and how we maximize the space we have. And we've also seen huge developments in children's independence as learners. And I hope that's something that we as an organization take on and develop.
Thanks a lot, Ahmed. Sunil.
Well, I think this pushed change or this forced change because of, especially in Hong Kong, has been dealing with this for the last 1 year, 6 months of protests followed by 6 months of COVID, is really created a larger appreciation of human mankind to each other in this fast, busy society we live in. And knowing that confidence within all your stakeholders that a well-managed change can only be positive.
That's great. Thanks, Sunil. John.
I know we're short on time. Oh, look, hopeful. That this continues, that this conversation becomes action, that the closeness that I certainly feel, that just feels, I mean, I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it feels like people are more open, people are more embracing change, they're more willing to talk about change. And that again is the gold that we have to mine and dig to be able to make this last. Otherwise, that risk of it falling back is very top of mind for me. So it's hoping that the traction continues, that we continue to work even closer together. And it's all about the students, because that's what's at the heart of everything.
Fantastic. Finally, Ambrose.
Yeah, just in terms of optimism and hopes, since the beginning of the 21st century, we all talk about change, transformation. I strongly believe that COVID forced change without choice. So it will not observe the future of education very, very well, more innovation and faster improvements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambrose. And I'm sorry, I realize now because I don't see all the videos. Jessica, sorry, it was Jessica I left off.
We're way over time now, but awesome conversation. I think at the end of the day, I'm hopeful that we embrace the change and that we're very intentional about what we keep and we're very intentional about what we do away with. So I'll keep it brief.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, well, thank you everyone today, and we'll be posting this online shortly.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Justin, thank you.